call to order the Finance, Buildings, and Grounds Committee meeting, which was duly noticed on December 13th, 2024, through posting and notification of the press in accordance with Wisconsin Statute 19.84. So, Jim, what have you done this last month or so from a safety message standpoint?
I don't want to get personal, so I have done nothing.
Okay, all right. And Carl, how about you?
What's that?
From a safety share standpoint, what have you done that could be shared?
Oh, you don't want to hear it.
Only if we can learn from it.
Can you?
Absolutely.
Can learn from mine.
I wasn't prepared, but let me just think a second, because there's always something we can do.
It's
to
okay.
improve things.
Just if you had something. And I mean, really the only thing that I had, and it's one of the things that I have always tried to do and being here, and is being aware of our surroundings. Clearly, with the situation at the school in Madison, it is just being hyper visual all the time and paying attention to everybody all the time. And I may be one that, maybe it's how I grew up, but I'm always looking at people, and when they're looking anything different than normal, and we've had a few instances from the board and some situations where I'm looking and I'm following them out the door and I'm following them down the hall, and I want to make sure that door is locked, because that's the easiest access to us quickly. But then also, it is, well, what if something is? What is your first thought mindset? What are you going to do? Well, obviously, if we can hide and run, that's the thing to do, but ain't much place to run and hide. So I'm always testing the table. Can I pick this up and use it for a shield? So those are the kinds of things, and if it's shield so we can get out the door, as many people, then so be it. But that's part of that, being hyper vigilant and paying attention to your surroundings. Now, paying attention to your surroundings fits a whole lot of different things. I use just that scenario, but fundamentally, where am I at and what am I doing, which is one of the things I've shared for the longest, fits with paying attention to your surroundings. So, thank you. Anyone else add to that? Okay. Hearing none. Is there a motion to adopt the December 17th, 2024 Buildings and Grounds Committee agenda?
So moved.
Second.
And that passes unanimously with Commissioner Johnson not present. Next, presentation of the fiscal year 24-25 year-to-date November financial summaries, and consider approval to move to the board. Mr. McCray.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Argery. Just a couple quick points, and historically we go through this data relatively quickly. If you'd be kind enough to refer to your revenue sheet and your expense sheet side by side, and particularly Fund 10. Because I want to remind the committee, the board, and the community that we have a particularly low cash position come November of every year. And this is really illustrative of that effect. So you'll notice our revenues were just over $2 million in November 2024, and our expenses were nearly $10 million in November 2024. Right, and so it's not as though we don't have the cash, but we are at a really low cash position, and we were looking to tap, and we did tap our line of credit to the tune of approximately $5 million in November. The $2 million you see there in revenue is really a mix between Title I reimbursement. Title I is our largest federal grant outside of ESSER, and then it's about a 50-50 split, and then ESSER reimbursement. So in the future, we won't have $1 million worth of ESSER, and one can conceivably say we wouldn't have $1 million of ESSER expenses in the first quarter to second quarter of 2025 as well. But nonetheless, it still illustrates the fact we are in a low cash position come November. Right, and further establishes why we need that line of credit in November. You'll see another low point come January, February as well, simply because of how the district is receiving its tax receipts from municipalities as channeled through Rock County.
Any questions? Carl, Jim?
You don't want to hear my comments.
Is there a motion to move these to the board for approval?
So moved.
Second.
And that also passes unanimously with Commissioner Johnson not present. 1.5, update on long-range facility master planning. Mr. McCray.
So joining us today are some familiar faces. Dave Leader, of course, from Facilities, Julie Lurkey as well, and then Mike Johnson from JP Cullen. EUA cannot be with us. So we're just going to go through this PowerPoint relatively quickly. And you have actually a number of agenda items within the PowerPoint. And right now we're going to focus on this particular agenda item. What we wanted to share with you as we adjust the PowerPoint presentation is really kind of the projected timeline and the thought processes that go into that timeline. Again, we really value our partners, EUA from the architectural and engineering standpoint, and JP Cullen from the construction manager standpoint. So what you'll see here, and thank you very much for that, is just a reminder in terms of the architectural design process. And that's where we have schematic design, right? So kind of the conceptual standpoint of the deliverable, the actual design development or the fine tuning of that schematic. That then goes into construction documents, and it's really construction documents that we pass over throughout the process, actually, hand in hand with JP Cullen, to where Mike Johnson, who happens to be with us, will go through the bid process. Right, so bidders, right, bid on actual construction documents, right, so they understand the scope of the work and the requirements of the work. And after those bids are awarded, we move into procurement. You may recall during essentially 2021, 22, right, is the pandemic really hampered, right, and still to some extent hampers certain products within the supply chain, right, so please keep that in mind. Then, of course, we have building construction, and then the project is complete. Superintendent Holtzman has been very good about keeping you abreast during regular board meetings, right? And the one thing that he has shared both with principals and the board is we have a number of sites and they will not all break ground on the same date, right? So we're looking at a number of bid packages as we go throughout the process. This is really, if you've not heard already, probably a 4-year construction work process. And we're going to go through some of the rationale as in addition to scope as to why that is. So I referenced earlier, keep in mind the pre-construction phases, right? That involves design, engineering, and drawings. And as you may recall, some of our building, particularly one, it's only one, goes back to 1880, right? Then we go back to the 1930s, right? The 50s, the 60s, right? And so on and so forth to where we are today. Sadly, not everything has been digitized over time, right? So we've been working to digitize actual blueprints from 1930s, right, that we have on file. And the digitizing of that is first beginning with scanning, and then it moves into the format that architecture and engineers use, right? So they can't manipulate a PDF, but it starts with the PDF, right? So digitizing it gives a really good baseline understanding. But then also what comes into play, in particular to our older buildings, right, is you can't necessarily take for granted what's on the print is real life. Right, so you may recall there's design documents and there are as-builts, and sometimes as-built isn't necessarily documented. So you want to really check things out, right, to ensure, right, that when you begin to add or design or create new construction drawings, right, that there's been an element of field work to substantiate those drawings that have been digitized. Right, so just keep that in mind. It's a lot of time and effort that we don't necessarily see, right? There's construction duration during bid package, like Mr. Johnson will refer to the fact that we kind of have an understanding of the timeline related to Franklin. We have an understanding of timelines to secure pathways in addition to their entire K-12 portfolio when they perform similar work, right? So all that's going into the planning process between EUA and JP Cullen. Similar to secure pathways, like we're grouping some schools, right? So, right, Van Buren and Harrison, right, are very similar, right? So do we do that somewhat together and similar to our triplet schools as well? And then really, and I think I made reference to site investigation already, and the district provided some feedback, right? So your representative, Commissioner Ardrey, participated on the initial call with both JP Cullen and EUA, and certainly Superintendent Holtzman was on that call as well, right? So what you see today has gone through a few drafts, right? Just to essentially, with the understanding that everyone can get through the gate at the same time. right? And then understanding that, you know, where do we want to show that we're performing work essentially illustrative of the community's investment. Right, so please kind of keep that in mind. You have a handout at your desk side, right? I believe you do, right? That illustrates the 3 phases, right? It's in Mike Johnson format. I just kind of took it and dumped it into PowerPoint. And so what you'll see here is the summer 2025, Craig Enhanced Security and Parker Enhanced Security. Those discussions related to interior security measures have already begun. And I know we're looking at a meeting over the next week or so to where we can follow back up with our principals, right? Because again, we're still in the schematic side of the equation, right? We're conceptually developing a plan to address the need. We're working through that process. Keep in mind that we're consuming nearly $3 million of remaining dollars from the 2020 referendum, right? And then that pot is nearly exhausted. Because when we look to reduce from 169.5 to the 151.8, right, we needed to reduce, but yet this is a very important feature for our schools, and so we still had dollars. So when we look at overhead paging, right, that was earmarked for about $1 million. We know with our new director of IT, Brian Erskine, that that cost is not enough, right? The cost for that is going to be much more than the $1 million. So then we're reallocating that $1 million to help cover the cost of the Craig and Parker interior security measures. So when we look at interior security measures, there's been some discussion about doors, right? But we cannot act myopically, right? We just cannot look at doors. There are other elements, and so when we work with Craig Clements, as well as Dave Leader and his team, right, is we're looking, is it an additional need for a camera? Is it a door? Is it a new key fob access point, right? So we're not just looking at doors, right? We have to understand the composition. So just, again, keep that in mind. The other 3 things we're looking at, and this is referendum approved, right? In addition to, there may be some other roof work, that's a difficult phrase to say, right? And Mr. Leader will talk a little bit about this when we get into the roofing plan. But Washington, Franklin, and Rock River Charter are slated and is part of the 151.8. When you see the roof plan a little bit later, we have a lot of roofs, right? And so when we look even to the 151.8, please keep in mind, right, there was nearly 500 million plus of identified work that needs to be accomplished. We're addressing, right, less than 20% of that with the 151.8. Right, so because we have 151.8, which is a significant amount of money, right, does not mean we are addressing all of the district's issues. We look into bid package 1, right, so you'll see the timeline there, June 26 through August 27, Lincoln, Jefferson, Wilson, Parker, Craig, and the Educational Services Center. Bid package 2, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Roosevelt, and Washington. And bid package 3, the Chestnut House, Rock River Charter, Jackson, Kennedy, Marshall, Van Buren, Harrison, Addison, and Franklin. Now the scope of work at each of those buildings, right, varies. If you look at the elementaries, there's more significant investment at the elementaries, which requires more design and engineering time than perhaps other schools. If we look at Craig and Parker beyond the security measures internally, right, it's predominantly auditorium work. Similar when you look at Franklin. Correct, Mr. Dummerhausen? Franklin Auditorium, or Addison, which one is it? I think it's probably both at the middle school you're concerned about. Marshall does not have an auditorium, right? So trying to essentially weigh those packages for some level of even distribution. Simplistically, you could say bid package 1, 2, and 3 have a value of about $50 million each. The other thing you need to keep into consideration, and not a bullet point at the beginning of the presentation, is we have to understand, right, the contractor's capacity to deliver. Right? We're not the only district exercising construction in Rock County, or Walworth, or Jefferson, or Dane. Right? So when we look to subcontractors from J.P. Cullen's standpoint, right, how many glazers are out there to do glass installation when we come to the building envelope solution? How many mechanical engineers are out there, and particularly the ones that win the bid? Right? So getting out ahead, right, and this is where we look to also 2026, right, is summer work is most likely already booked. Right, so to accomplish that level of work, which is why we really wanted to secure, with Mr. Leader's assistance, roofers in the fall, right, to address these issues in the spring and summer. And we're just gonna pause here because we have other agenda items, right? So I don't want to get ahead of myself. I think that was 1.5, just to kind of give you a viewpoint of long-range master facilities planning. This is your first glimpse at it, right? So Superintendent Holtzman, right, will share this information again with the full board in January, right? But work has already begun. Any questions for myself, Mr. Leader, Mr. Johnson?
Must be dazzling, no questions.
Okay.
Yeah. Next, yep, 1.6. Update on 2020 referendum ESSER funded and locally funded capital maintenance projects.
Okay, thank you. I have two updates on the referendum update. Next level projects. Our building automation system has been built. Next phase is a training phase, which will take place on January 7th of 2025. So that will consist of our HVAC specialist and our 5 secondary maintenance personnel. So they will have in-depth training on how to operate the system, how to make changes within the system, whether it's an air handler, temperature adjustment, that type of thing. The next step to that, and that'll be additional training, is event scheduling. They will be trained on, for example, if Parker's got an auditorium play going on a Friday night, starting at 4, ends at 10, they will be able to schedule the heat and or cooling, whatever season it is, to provide them a comfortable room to partake in. So that'll be all part of that training package. And that, right now, it's kind of relied on one person, right? So that gets a little taxing, so.
Dave, can you share a little bit with the committee in terms of Niagara, Tritium Niagara, and the building automation system really serves as not only HVAC, but?
Yeah, there's other components to this. So with this system, we could also capture door security. We could capture cameras, lighting, whether it's exterior or interior. And there's one more aspect that kind of eludes me right now. Lighting, security, doors. So it's got other facets to it that we can use to enhance the security of our buildings as well.
So the committee may recall, Mr. Johnson did some pricing from J.P. Cullen's standpoint in terms of adding additional fobs to our buildings, because we have some doors that could use a fob. But part of the hindrance we've had, right, is the fact that do we tie into the old building automation system? So Mr. Leader referenced the fact that card access is a component of that, or do we begin to build out, right, off of the Tritium Niagara system for a new card? So once that is built, we'll be able to begin that next phase, right, which is adding, those fob card access readers at the locations where we have Tritium Niagara as the building automation system. As we roll out the long-range facilities plan and we upgrade the building automation systems with the mechanicals throughout the elementaries and so forth, we'll be able to add those fobs at that time as well.
Dave, years ago, you and I both know that the maintenance guys in the middle and high schools took like a computer home with them and they could kind of see what the boilers were doing and that. Is this gonna be kind of the same way with the new integrated system? Are they gonna be able to operate it from home, or will they have to come into the building itself?
They will be able to remotely access that
Okay.
system.
Yep, okay, thank you.
You bet.
So, Mr. Leader, Mr. McCray, when he said implementing the building automation system and what it is capable of, when would we be when would we be installing those aspects? I mean, will that follow the phasing that we see here in in phase one and then those individual, or is that future phase stuff, or is it a mixture of just throughout?
It's future phase. Right now, I need to get that HVAC part solidified. It's the most important thing right now, because we're lacking there as we speak.
And that was, so the last board meeting report out, I shared that part of it because I knew that we would be through that. So just for, probably to help the board, I understand because I've seen the old system
Right.
on the computer. So I would ask, even if it's just screenshots of what a building looks like, and as we, can see the temperatures throughout the buildings, because if there's one complaint that we all hear is, it's too hot over here, it's too cold over here. Probably the
Absolutely.
other way around, but anyway, and just some snapshots to say, okay, we will know the temperatures, and then here's how we can address that. So I think that would be really helpful for the board, but then also as we share with the building personnel, here's what we're actively doing to help those situations.
I couldn't agree more, and I think what you folks will see is a real amazing product from what we've had in the past.
Yeah.
Right? It's gonna be more user-friendly for the end user. In the graphics, floor plans, all that is I think you'll really enjoy that when you see it.
And just snippets of that, obviously, we don't need to go into a
Sure.
whole lot of detail, but
Sure.
yeah, thank you.
Absolutely.
So if I may, just to expand a little bit, because there's lots of words going back and forth, is we just shared with you phase one, phase two, phase three, or bid package one, bid package two, bid package three. So the work in terms of adding those additional key fobs were appropriate, particularly at buildings such as Craig and Parker, where the building automation system is complete, will be much sooner, right, than bid package one, bid package two, bid package three. So kind of that mix, I believe you referenced, Commissioner Ardrey, right? So it's not as though we're waiting until June of 2027. Dave is absolutely correct, right? It's heating and cooling first and understanding the components of the software through training of that, right? And then when do we add the fob? The other thing is we have a good partner now who has an individual, right? And when that individual takes vacation or is out of work, right, with the subcontractor, our access to the fob system in terms of adding, repairing, right, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, is we're not able to address, right? So kind of, do we bring that in-house to where we run, our electrical friends run some low voltage, right? We install the card reader, it's programmed into the system. If we do that internally, we probably have to have more than one person as well, because like we do afford vacation time like our subcontractors do. Like, how do we manage that system? That is where Mr. Leader will be working with his staff.
Thanks for putting a little more meat on those bones.
I have one more update. This is regarding the Marshall Harrison fire alarm installation. We will start the Harrison fire alarm system installation over winter break. So what they're going to be doing is a lot of the classroom rough-ins for the devices, so it's not distractive while the kids are in the building. They will still be working while our kids are in the building, but they'll be doing a lot of corridor work, which means they'll be installing their J-hooks and everything down the corridors for all of the cabling. This work will go on heavily through spring break, as well as Marshall. That's when Marshall, we're going to start that process at Marshall's during spring break. A lot of heavy work, and then the end date of June 27th for completion at both Harrison and Marshall. So it's underway.
So it works. I have a question. We, in our homes, check for, you're talking fire alarms, but we check for gases too in our homes. Do we do that in the schools?
We do in our boiler rooms. Carbon monoxide testers are in our boiler rooms. Yeah.
Do we do remote areas that are away from that? I'm thinking if the boiler room is this position, and we got two areas like this, are we also checking periodically in those areas?
In our large areas, auditoriums, gyms, we do have CO2 sensors.
Okay. Okay. Just concerned how important those things are too.
Right.
And then it seems like there's another thing we check. I put in new things this year to test for. I can't remember what it was.
Right. The nice part about a lot of our buildings, we don't use a lot of natural gas. Kitchens, for an example, right, Liz, in our elementaries. Basically subject to those boiler rooms. We do have some units that are on rooftop that do have a natural gas supply.
Do we have hot water heaters that, for individual areas like labs and that?
We do, yes.
So that area would be an area to check
Yes.
because it'd be natural gas?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Darmahausen, I appreciate the fact that you believe our buildings are airtight. So that's, that's just a funny thought that popped into my head, to which, of course, they are not, but it does not diminish, right, your concern or the fact that we are monitoring that, right? But it is just kind of, we probably, some of our buildings, leak like a screen door with submarines, so, or submarines with screen doors.
The reason we cook with electricity, just a thing, no natural gas, but we do have a natural gas water heater in a separate area, furnace in an area and that. So we're very aware that those other areas are just as important. That was my question. And thank you for answering it.
So I'm just going to give a quick update on the Riverside baseball field. We had Hutchinson out on December 4th through 6th. Despite it being listed under winter break projects, it was done a little bit earlier. And they added a lot of fill into the infield areas. There were pretty substantial ruts around the infield and the batter's box and backstop area. So that was all filled in. It looks phenomenal. There was also loads of fill taken out to the warning track, which was significantly lower than the outfield. So it was a bit of a hazard there. So that has all been filled in as well. We had like a walkthrough, if you say, on December 10th with POB, and everything looks good. There's a few items still left to be done right before the spring season starts, such as the pitching mound and the bullpen area still need new rubbers put on and more fill added in before they're good to play. But it is looking rather nice, and we have a few, we also want to take a look at the fencing in the back, or the back, I guess the backdrop, that has pretty much lived its life. So we'll be looking at or replacing that as well in the near future.
Seeing no questions, thank you.
Okay.
Next, are we on to 1.7 or?
Good to go. Okay. Parker High School. Yes, we're in the situation where we have to perform an emergency roof replacement over the main gym. We've had a wind event that took the flashing off the building. Wind undermined the EPDM, which is your 60 mil rubber roofing, and raised it. When that happens, it loosens the fasteners. When the fasteners are loosened, there's no way of re-adhering that system back down to the roof deck. So what we plan on doing is, let me back up a little bit. Since we do have a huge maple floor under that roof section, we have put a temporary patch, if you will, on that roof section. We feel it's gonna be pretty watertight, right? I'm looking at the long-range weather, we're looking pretty good. So the replacement of that roof will be first week of January, weather pending. Now, if it's snowing, we're gonna have to wait another week, right? Or whatever it may be. So there's also another roof section, small roof sections, penthouse roof section that's over the east section of the building, over by the east drive. That needs to be replaced as well. That again, flashing came loose. They're older roof sections. So, yeah, we went out to bid. We went out to bid for the contractor, and we also went out to bid for materials to get our best bang for the buck. So, we've got our contractor on board, and so again, we'll be starting first week of January.
Can you share the cost?
The cost is $470,000. Another thing I'd like to share is that this will not disrupt any gym activities. Talked to the contractor, the roofing consultant, they all felt comfortable that we can still maintain our curriculum schedules in the gym class.
My question would be, it's from this windstorm we had. Is insurance involved in any way there?
Is what, I'm sorry?
Does our insurance cover any part of that?
With the age of that roofing, I'm afraid not.
So, just to perhaps expand upon that a little bit, the committee may recall, as we were looking to our property liability line renewal effective July 1, insurance companies, right, are getting wise to where the depreciated value of that roof is what? And if it's zero, that's what you're getting, right? So that roof, as where many of our roofs are fully depreciated, right? So if it had 75% life left, we'd probably get 75% left, or a 75% reimbursement for that. We have zero left, simply because of the age, right? So this is just a predicament we're in as a district. I believe that is coal in that particular bag there, Commissioner Dammerhausen. So Santa's giving us coal for that roof replacement. I think too, right, it's the funding source for that, right, is essentially we're tapping Fund 46, right? So Fund 46, the board adopted in 2015. That's the long-range capital investment fund. It needed 5 years to mature before those funds could be tapped. There's a 10-year capital plan. We'll need to revisit that 10-year capital plan related to Fund 46, but we're essentially using Fund 46 dollars. We don't typically have $470,000 just lying around in the district's budget to cover potential roof replacement. Now, certainly, we could tap, quote-unquote, what's called fund balance, right? But fund balance, right, we just talked about earlier, as we were reviewing our P&L, our profit and loss, right, is we're at a low point in our fund balance. And so you're really robbing Peter to pay Paul because you need that fund balance to pay for your ongoing expenses, right? So this is, again, recognition to the board, to the district for creating Fund 46, that long-term capital maintenance fund.
Can I move on to winter break projects?
Yes, please.
All right. So at Washington Elementary School, over the break, we will be installing new ceiling, grid, and tile in 3 of the rooms, 112, 113, and 214. These are the rooms that have the 12 by 12 tiles that are glued to a plaster ceiling, and they are beginning to fail. So our answer is to go in, put new grid, tile in over the winter break, so. No, sir. Again, I'll mention Harrison Elementary School, that's the other winter break project. Of course, that's a fire alarm system installation, so.
Okay. 1.7, information on district-wide long-range roof replacement schedule, minus emergency replacements.
Yeah, so I'll ask Mr. Leader to join me here as we just go through a couple quick slides. What Dave is holding in his hand is a book generated by our consultant Apex. And so it's an inventory, life cycle analysis of every district roof section that we have, right? So we're not going to put that book into PowerPoint. We're going to use Franklin as an illustration for you. So I'll ask Dave to kind of take you through this table from left to right, not necessarily line by line, but explain this is indicative of what we have for each building.
So if you look at the roof ID, 01 through 16 going down, that's how many roof sections are at Franklin Middle School. Each roof section has been identified by roof type, square foot, condition being rated from a 1 to 10, 1 being the worst, 10 being the best, estimated service life, estimated remaining life, and then a budget number for replacement. So we have 170 roof sections throughout the district. Each one of those has been evaluated, documented, and in a format just like this.
So I'm going to have Dave take you through Franklin Middle School here. You'll notice when you look at the table, we had some sections which were at 10. And Dave will talk you through that. On the left, you'll see a diagram, which is just more or less of a sketch. The red area, right, is what was just recently done. The green area is what is to be done. And then on the Google Sheet, I guess I'm doing Dave's presentation, the red area, again, is what was done recently. And the white area is what needs to be done, right? And I'm sorry, Dave, I
Well
think I
done.
just took all
Well
your
done.
thunder on that one.
No, so as Dan alluded to, the white area, this is what we're looking at replacing in that next phase, minus the pool roof. You'll see that on the far right bottom. That's a steel roof. We may have to do, we may have to do some work in between the steel because there are rubber. Yeah,
That metal single.
the metal
section
single,
15.
yeah. You can see repair EDM valleys. So there's a valley in between those those metal roof sections that needs some attention. So really, I mean, if you look at this whole plan and you look at all our number ones, we're in a deficit. We're in a huge deficit, we really are. A lot of our roof sections are well above their life expectancy. We've got a lot of EPDMs that are shrinking from the parapets, right? Any roof penetrations we have for HVAC-related equipment, sewer vents, those are pulling away. So this really helps out a lot to identify all those areas. And it's nice to have this so we can come up with a long-range plan.
I think part of our challenge, right, is not only sharing with the committee, the board, but the community as well, is the fact that we have nearly a $30 to $40 million asset that no one necessarily sees every day, right? But it protects, right, a ton of stuff underneath that roof. So Mr. Leader referenced the fact that we have, a maple floor under a section of roof, or we have classrooms and learning spaces, right, and offices and everything else. And so if the roofs go, so too does the space underneath that, which is just more costly to the district, right? So it's just not very, if you will, appealing, right? They're all flat roofs, people don't see them, we're kind of out of sight, out of mind. We do not have within our operating budget, nor our Fund 46, a 30 to 40 million set aside for roof replacements. Every year, we will be identifying more roofs that need to be replaced than we have funding to replace. And this is where we look into phase 2, which is years out of our long-range facilities master plan, because we identified roofs as part of that in excess of 500 million of capital deferred maintenance. Right, so it's just important that, yes, we're knocking out roofs, right? But the funding source every year will be at a deficit. We just don't have the resources to keep pace in the 20-year plan that has been outlined. But we need to have a plan, so we identify the fact that we're at a deficit, which potentially, helps fuel a phase 2 question, in addition to all the other needs throughout the district, right? So this is a reality check for us, right, in our community. This is where we're at. Any questions for Mr. Leader? He's our on-site roof expert.
Yes.
Maybe a comment more than a sorry, go ahead. Nope.
Has there been any discussion yet as to the possibility of putting solar on roofs now that they will be better roofs?
So we are going to let you, Commissioner Johnson, and Commissioner Dommerhausen wrestle between geothermal and solar. So we just
Okay.
kind of want to see that, because we know Commissioner Dommerhausen's a big geothermal fan, right? So I think one of these is yes, right? That's always the possibility. I would say right now we're at a point of consumption, right? So because we have a $151.8 million project, right? And so when we look at these roofs, there's lots of communication out there. I'm sure Dave heard quite a bit this fall when he went to the WASBO, Wisconsin Association of School Business Officials Masters Facilities Conference. It's a very fair question. It's just not a simple answer, right? First, we have to get our roofs fixed, right? So is
Right.
Franklin perhaps an ideal spot? Potentially.
Yeah.
Is there IRA funding? There is. Will there be IRA funding after January 20th, 2025? We don't know. And with come IRA funding, right, so I can't remember what IRA stands for anymore. It's not the Irish Republican Army, that much I know for sure.
It's Inflation
Right,
Recovery Act.
Yeah, the Inflation Recovery Act. Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. We went to a presentation 2 years ago, Dave Leader, Dave Farwell, and myself, put on by Baker Tilly, right? Simply because of the volumes of paperwork that comes along, I should say, with IRA funding, right? So it's still an administrative burden for us. I'll get back to you at times. Sometimes we just don't have the capacity, right? And so then do we farm out that capacity to potentially a vendor such as Baker Tilly? We're still managing the project, but first and foremost, we gotta get the roof on, right? Then we get into the discussion, even if that's great, so we have to work with our utility, right? And I'm
Yes,
not
we
gonna
do.
stand here and talk to you about Alliant Energy's position regarding solar, because I'm not that well informed. But keep in mind that throughout the state, there are different utilities, and there are different utility programs in support of solar energy. And then is it a buyback or is it a reduction for us? Right, so these are all the calculations that we would need to get into. And quite frankly, we're just not there yet to do that.
Okay, thank you. I did take the initiative to do a little bit of research on this topic, and there were a couple of articles by a Kenneth A. Walls, who teaches science and engineering at Madison Area Technical College. And he came up with some interesting ideas that really did not occur to me. I mean, obviously, there can be a real savings having solar energy depending on depending on your energy facility. But he talks about how it's also, providing learning environments and instructional opportunities for students, because he is at Madison Area Technical College, and it would offer our students who participate in Black Hawk Technical College the same kind of advantage to learn a great deal about renewable energy and and be able to get, you know, a nice job after graduation. But anyway, that idea had never occurred to me, but it's something out there, and I think we should look at it as soon as the potential gives us that chance.
And it's a very fair informational item. You know, we can look to our south, and Clinton Community School District has 2 buildings, and they put solar on one of them. We could certainly go up Highway 3990, and we could look at Wanakee. We could look at Oregon, not quite up 3990, right? So districts are embracing it. You know, and this is what we hear from our counterparts when we go to conferences, right? It just is sometimes, where are you at, right? And does it really kind of play into the mix? I think it would be, you know, again, we're not planning, but I hope you take solace in the fact that these are discussions. It's just, how does it work, right? Who do we need to partner with? Does it make sense? What does our utility say in terms of reimbursement or cost reduction? And there's a cost to it as well, right? So that's the other thing to keep in mind. But first, if we were to look, let's say, at Franklin, which will have the newest roof and the broadest roof, right? Is that a candidate? I mean, these are all things, right, that just take time for us to navigate. We appreciate your patience, right? It is something we think about. It's just not an automatic, yeah, I think we can do that. Right? And I know that's not what you're suggesting. You know, it's just one of those, like, we're not gonna put it on an old roof that needs to be replaced.
Yes.
And then even when we go back to the Inflation Reduction Act, right, and you say, well, can we get a portion of roof replacement cost? Then again, we're engaging Baker Tilly, we're engaging other partners, you know, whether that's JP Cullen, Apex Consultants, to work through that process. And then what is our capacity internally, right, in order to do so? Because even though we may look to value partners, it's still work on our behalf.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So with respect to the, excuse me, the long-range roofing plan, seeing the way Franklin sort of the new in one phase and then another phase, and mine is just more of a comment of, as we look at, because it's easy to say Franklin roof, but it isn't Franklin roof, it's Franklin roofs. I mean, so each building, I mean, even Parker, you're going, didn't we just replace Parker's roof? Well, we did a section, and until we see the, not footprint, the roof print, to see all of the sections, the way they're broken out, it becomes really important how we talk about that. So I think we need to make sure that we put names to those roof sections, and that's probably a better way to share the information, because I remember replacing a roof here, 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 and here, but yet I also know, because I was on the roof, that those were only roof sections, so. And I can't help myself, I wasn't gonna do this, but I can't help myself. As a community and as a board, we would have to embrace the renewable aspects of solar. It does not pay for itself. It does not pay for itself. It pays for it in a large scale environment, but individually, it really doesn't pay from a building standpoint. As we look at, well, the building integrity, if the building isn't capable, then we have to do some things to structurally have it, and now you're spending a lot more money. We've looked at, I mean, so in 2 weeks I won't be working for Align Energy anymore, but we've looked at this. So we actively, how do I want to say it? We want to partner where it makes sense to do that. So many of what was mentioned, when those buildings were built, they were built with that in mind. So if we were building a new building, from an integrity standpoint, we should absolutely build it for solar panels, and ideally rotating and all of those things to get maximum benefit, particularly recognizing the style of roofs that are going on. We even can get the reflection to make them even more efficient. So there are lots of ways of doing that. But replacing our roof sections, and considering we have $500 million of other work to do, it becomes, where do we get the best bang for our buck? And That's a bigger question. I mean, definitely something to continue to look at. And as the costs hopefully come down and make it more viable, it becomes even more important, much like geothermal. If things go in new, you can absolutely do that. But until we build a new facility, I think it's going to be hard to make economic sense of that.
There were, if I may, sir.
Yes, sir.
There was one, and I'll ask Dave to kind of chime in, right? I have a little bit more windshield time now, so I come back to the district office with lots of ideas. And so I was visiting one time with Dave Leader and Dave Farwell about, is there some sort of mechanism that is perhaps solar related, right? That could fuel a pump that would then push glycol through particular building entrance walkways, right? Just to reduce our slip fall hazard. Now, to Commissioner Ardrey's point, there's a significant investment there, right? And you have to ask yourself, right? So we're pushing out glycol, we got to put in all the groundwork, we're pouring new concrete, right? We have the solar aspect of it. But I just share that as letting you know, Commissioner Johnson, like it's something we think about, right? But is it, to maybe use Commissioner Ardrey's words, hopefully correctly, is it cost allowable for us to do that type of initiative, right? So Dave kind of nicely put me in my place, right, in terms of, well, that's a grand idea, Mr. McCray, but it's probably not going to work, right? So, but thanks for thinking of ways that we can potentially reduce our slip fall hazard and a potential workers' comp claim. So. And I'm going to introduce Liz. It.
I didn't have to blush after all. Nobody heard, right? So overall, our DPI review was fairly successful. So it happens every 5 years. As Dan said, we had 4 different people on site. We had 2 program consultants. We also had 2 health nutritionalists. So during this time, it's really a 2-phase process. So first of all, we'll talk about some of our accolades because we want to get those in first. So one of the things they were really impressed by is our Breakfast in the Classroom program. We run that program at all of our elementaries, and a key to that success is our administration. If our administration and our teachers didn't back that program would not be successful. And so with Breakfast in the Classroom, our teachers actually distribute the meals to our students. So our staff will pack a cooler each morning. That cooler has the breakfast items. We bag all the food items to try and just make it simple for our teachers and our staff. And then students get to choose their milk choice of chocolate or white milk. The other thing they were really impressed by was our second chance breakfast at Marshall Middle School. And again, that program wouldn't be successful at Marshall without the administration there supporting that. So as you see in the photo, kitchen manager Tammy Sanford, she takes that mobile cart and she moves it to the front, or to one of the entrance doors at Marshall. So that day when DPI was reviewing, 45 additional students received breakfast because of that mobile cart. Those students may be a little late getting to school. They didn't have time to sit in the cafeteria and enjoy breakfast, but they definitely needed breakfast that day. So that's just a great program to get our students off on that right foot. It starts their day. They're full, they can concentrate. The other things that they were really happy about are a couple of our standard operating procedures for after-school snack and breakfast in the classroom. So again, with those programs, we really rely on our teachers and our supervisors to distribute those items. So what we did to try to make that easier for them, or if there's a substitute staff member, we put in there exact instructions of what that needs so that we're compliant. Because with our program, there's so many rules, so we really want to make it simple for our staff. Like with breakfast in the classroom, if I hand out all those breakfasts to my students and then I go back and check off names, technically we can't receive reimbursement for that. That name has to be checked off at the time that meal is served to that student. So it's the same with after-school snack. So it's really important that we communicate with our teachers, our staff, and let them know those rules. So they're actually taking those SOPs, the standard operating procedures, back to their team at DPI, and they're going to share them and suggest that maybe more districts across the state go to that model of having that standard operating procedure right there for everybody. So part one, really our review is a two-phase part. So even though they were only on site 3 days, we began preparing back in October for this. And some of the documentation that we send are a lot of our free and reduced applications. We send an eligibility list that says every student's name that qualifies for either free or reduced meals. We send our direct certification files. And direct certification are families that may qualify for benefits like SNAP or Medicare. So those families don't actually have to fill out that free and reduced application. They qualify based on direct certification. That's a program that I run. It's automatic. So it's nice families don't have to take the time to fill that out. We also upload our child nutrition labels, our product formulation statements for all food items. So every item that we serve, we have to make sure meets those federal requirements. Things like whole grain, how much fat is in there, no trans fat added. We also submit our Smart Snack documents. So 2 items that you have in front of you today. One is a Rice Krispie treat. The other is a brand new Frito-Lay item this year, the Ranch Fantasta Sticks. So with those items, they're called non-program foods. We sell them a la carte. So each non-program food item, we have to run through a Smart Snack calculator that the USDA has given us. And that means then we have to take that document, download it, make sure that we keep that in our records to show that that product's compliant. So like that Rice Krispie treat there, that you think that's in the store, that's actually a different product that you cannot buy in the grocery store. It's whole grain, it's 51% whole grain. So our items, even though we try to have brand recognition throughout our program, they're not exactly the same items, and you'll see that a lot. Even with those Fantasta sticks, they're not available to purchase out in retail. So we also upload documentation for all of our federal programs, school breakfast, after-school snack, our fresh fruit and vegetable grant, as well as lunch. And those items include things like temperature logs, all of our recipes, our standardized recipes, and also our production records. And our production records really act as a receipt for our program. That shows that we're documenting temps for our food, we're holding things correctly. It shows our brands, our manufacturer numbers, just to make sure, again, that that product is compliant and meets the federal requirements. So part 2, this is where things really got fun last week. And we are very fortunate. Our DPI team, they're really here to help us and help us learn and grow. So they visited 3 schools. Their first school was Rock River Charter, where they watched lunch service. Because the meals are prepared at Craig High School, they also visited Craig High School. When they were at Craig to watch meal preparation, they looked at things like Buy American. We have to track every item that we purchase that is not produced in the United States. So we keep a log of that. And actually, the majority of the items that we do purchase, they are from the United States. We try our best to buy local and stay within those guidelines. So then they went to Rock River Charter, they watched meal service. Again, that meal service at Rock River Charter, those teachers hand those meals out to the students. So again, we really need support from our district staff. Marshall Middle School, they watch breakfast, lunch, and after-school snack. So they watch service of all three of those programs as well as food prep. Adams was breakfast in the classroom, our lunch program, and our fresh fruit and vegetable program. So our fresh fruit and vegetable program is actually a grant. All of our CEP, our community eligible schools that are elementaries, they receive that grant. And with that, we can buy kind of some items that we may not serve normally for our students. Sometimes it might be a raspberry, just a little bit more expensive items. We try to get some things like star fruit and that kind of item, but a lot of times it depends on the season, so. So after that was over, those 3 days ended, we all came back together. Mr. McCray and I sat down with our DPI consultants. We kind of went over an overview of everything. We addressed things that we needed to fix. Many of those things we were able to correct on site. And the things that we were able to correct on site are often a health inspection. We have to post our health inspections for everybody to see. One of our schools had them back in the cafeteria, the serving area, but they didn't have them posted for our public to see. And we really want to be proud of our health inspections in Janesville. All of our schools that have kitchens do an amazing job on their health inspections. So we want to be proud of those and have them posted for families. There's a USDA Justice for All poster that we have to display. That also was back in the serving area at one of our buildings. They moved it to the front. It's all corrected, so that was done on site. There are a few things that I'll submit a corrective action plan for, such as our district wellness policy. We just need to update that. We need to get our wellness committee going again, so we're going to work on that. We also need to develop a standard operation procedure for our fresh fruit and vegetable grant. So I'll get that written, I'll get that submitted. DPI has given us till January 31st to get all these things taken care of. I don't think it's going to take us that long. We're really fortunate. We don't have a lot of items that will take much time to get fixed. But overall, it was fairly successful. We always shoot for 100. But they're here to teach, and we need to learn, and it helps us grow. So overall, it was a good experience. And our staff that had those guests in their building, they did an amazing job. So, does anybody have any questions?
Just one. The district wellness policy, I'm assuming this is student-related wellness policy?
That is. So we're required to have a district wellness policy. And it needs to be a group of a committee member. So it'll be consistent of students, somebody from the student nutrition department, whether that's myself or somebody else. And then we'll work with student services. We'll get that written, we'll make some adjustments. And that will include things like if we choose to sell caffeine, those type of things. So right now, we don't sell caffeine in our buildings, which is great. We probably don't want to. That's something that the USDA did allow us to do. We can have up to 10 milligrams a day. That started 2 years ago, so.
So really the wellness policy related to the food that we have available and serve is probably the key piece.
It is. It also pertains to like our high school stores. Any type of fundraisers where we sell food items that are being eaten at school. So.
Thank you. Mr. McCray.
Thank you, Commissioner Ardrey, and to the entire committee. I think when Liz and I were here last time, we told the story of visiting a school lunch, right? And how one particular student ate everything. There was nothing left. And in this photo, I won't overtly identify the young boy, right? There were a few boys at that table, but one of them ate everything off of their plate, right? So I'm sure you trusted me that it's a true story. This picture is proof that Liz, and particularly me, did visit a school, and that this is the group of first graders that we had lunch with at Roosevelt Elementary.
No, thank you. It was good to hear the positive report and DPI. Not much for us to do. Great. Okay, next, 1.9, presentation of the 25-26 budget development assumptions and consider approval to move to the board.
Thank you very much. We typically do this every year. I think we were a little bit late last year. So I would say we're right on time in terms of December for the committee viewing the budget assumptions and for hopefully the full board's adoption or the recommendation from this committee to send it to the full board for their consideration. So you have a memo, so you can reference both that as well as the slide deck. And I think it's very important, and we talk a lot about alignment, but working to ensure that our budget is aligned with our 4 priorities. Right, so I think it's just important to keep that on the forefront of our minds. Some high-level assumptions, right? You'll recall from the memo that per pupil categorical aid will remain at its current state of $742 per member. I believe we're calculating a essentially fairly stable membership. The revenue limit authority will increase, thanks in part to the governor's veto for another 398 years. This is year 398 because it's year 3. And then 325 per member. The revenue limit ceiling will most likely remain at 11,000, and categorical aid for special education, even though state statute talks about a 33% reimbursement, it's a sum certain. And so because costs went up for everyone throughout the state related to special education, it really netted out for an average district reimbursement of just over 30%. Right, so it's not 33% in its truest form because it comes from a finite pool of available resources. You'll recall in the memo, I believe I highlighted other districts. There was a recent, very exciting Madison area school business officials call, and then everyone contributes to a Google Doc in terms of what districts are assuming as their budget assumptions. Keep in mind, the governor will reveal his proposed budget most likely in February of 2025. Then Joint Finance will have a number of budget hearings, and Joint Finance will make their recommendations. They'll present those to the governor for his approval or veto, and hopefully we have a signed budget by July, which is the beginning of our fiscal year. And so when we move into a new biennial state budget, it is always with a certain amount of uncertainty in terms of what will be coming to school districts as well as other municipalities and state agencies throughout Wisconsin. Year 2 is more of a known factor. So we don't really know. My peers and I, again, from a budget assumption standpoint, are rather conservative. Keep in mind, the board has statutory obligations related to teacher contracts, and we need to make staffing decisions most likely no later than April 15th of 2025, which is 2.5 months prior to what we'll know the state budget to be. So it's always a very interesting exercise. When we look at expenses, right now CPIU is really about a 2.9 to 3% trending. We budgeted 3. And keep in mind that's the aggregate. Our net base wage adjustment is typically less than the published CPIU percentage amount. I'm rather conservative. Jamie Brown and I had a good conversations today about health insurance increases. It's a conservative 12.5%. That's really not much more than what we anticipated last year. It most likely could be more, right? So keep in mind as Jamie works through with our partners for health insurance that they don't really provide us with those rate increases. They can give us a projection, right? But they're not coming in until just before April. That's the nature of the beast. That's not specific to Janesville unless you have an alternative renewal date. I know our friends in Wanakee have a 10-1 renewal. Some districts have a 1-1 renewal. Most districts have a 7-1 renewal for health insurance. When we look at health insurance, right, our providers are not just looking at the budget year for the School District of Janesville, meaning what's your medical loss ratio from 7-1 to the present when we give you that renewal rate. They're looking at prior year, current year, right? So they're looking at a number of factors when they're calculating that percentage rate increase. Dental insurance 4% for student transportation. Keep in mind, our agreement with Van Gelder is for CPI +1, not to exceed 5, right? So that's how we can kind of land on 4 for them. And really a 5% in utility costs, which is relatively conservative. And I think I even made note, but did not necessarily include it on the expense side here. Within the budget memo you have is we can anticipate an increase in expenses relative to our property and liability. We saw nearly $250,000 for property liability and worker compensation increase in expenses, as well as accounting for the deduct in our dividend for workers' compensation. In consultation with our consultant, right, she anticipates not as high as last year, but don't expect it to be 0. So we did budget for an increase for that. So those are kind of some high-level projections. Again, the budget memo went into some additional detail. I included this as part of our budget assumptions, right? People are always curious. There's going to be a quiz point coming up in the future. I don't have any trash or treasure, though, to give out to the individual who gets this correct, but there will be a question at the end here. Let me quickly take you through. Line 1 is our projected membership, 3-year average of 91.97. That's stable. We've been fairly stable. And again, that's a 3-year average. Projected revenue limit increase of 325 nets us, if you will, just under 3 million, 2.98 in terms of additional revenue. That's it when we look at the allowable revenue limit increase from the state. Student fees aren't going to offset the number you'll see at the bottom. When we look at projected wage increase, right, FICA WRS, that's probably about 2.2 million. Projected health insurance increase of 1.3 million. Transportation about 50, projected property liability workers' compensation 125,000, added staffing 96,000. We've not factored in recent action by the Board of Education relative to a particular activity. That will actually be an add. Open enrollment net loss, sadly, we're not trending in a very positive direction. We still have a number of students who come and choose to select the School District of Janesville for their education, but we have a few more students leaving. That was a loss. I believe we covered that during the annual meeting. And then we have a total projected increase in expenses, conservative, real, of 3.8 million. So that illustrates a deficit of just under $900,000. So here's the quiz question. What action did the committee and the board take to relieve Fund 10 budgetary pressure? Mr. Holtzman cannot answer that, but he is my supervisor, so if no one else is going to, then we will call on Mr. Holtzman to answer that question. All right, so I'll put Mr. Holtzman on the spot in terms of what action did the board take to relieve Fund 10 budgetary pressure in the future?
The board paid off debt early.
The board paid off Fund 38 Wisconsin Retirement System debt early. So that will net us probably just under $1 million to the positive, right? And so we will account for that. But it was important to illustrate, right? We're at a negative as we currently stand. There are lots of things yet to be defined. If health insurance comes up 1% increase above the 12.5%, that's about $100,000. Right, so if it goes up 15.5, right, that nearly 900,000 becomes 1.2 million. And then the action that the board took, right, to remove its debt in the future beginning in 25-26, paying off that debt, frees up dollars to cover the deficit, but not enough. And this is everything else being status quo. Right, so this number will change, but we wanted to highlight this number to illustrate to you, had we not done that, this is what we'd be looking at. Now, sometimes someone will say, hey, it's a $152 million budget. What's the big deal? You can't find less than 1%? You go, well, is there an assumption there that perhaps we're living large already? Most likely not. And then we look at initiatives such as the director's team and Mr. Holtzman's leadership is undertaking, and we're looking at alternative services for students, right? And we're looking at other factors that we may want to be considering, right? Is that could be a need for new dollars or a replacement of existing dollars, right? So even when we pass a $14.5 million referendum, and again, we're very grateful for the community support in doing so, right? Is that status quo? That's not a build-up. So when we look to build up, we have to reallocate what we potentially have, or what we have currently. It's an adjustment. It's not necessarily a cost savings, right? But even here, going back to, I guess my point is, you can't cover less than 1%, you know, and sometimes I know Kevin Murray gives me a hard time. It's not Post-it notes, right? These are real expenditures, right? When it comes to 900,000, because that's 900,000, if you will, that is doing some good here in the School District of Janesville in support of its mission. So those are the budget assumptions. Questions on the memo, questions on the slide deck that I may be able to answer.
Your trivia question preempted my question, because I was gonna go. So we will actually have a projection of a deficit budget at this point, and the answer is really no, but
I would contend we're essentially break even
yeah.
at this point in time.
Because I knew the answer to the trivia question, but it was coming differently because I was gonna ask about it this way. So you were ahead of me this time.
That's hard for me to do. It's hard for me to keep ahead of Commissioner Ardrey and the committee, even more so with Superintendent Holtzman to keep ahead of him. So, you know, keep in mind that as you hear things as a committee and as a board, right, throughout the winter and the spring relative to the state's budget, right, there are significant decisions your body will be asked to make prior to solidification of that budget. It doesn't preclude, right, we don't have to act in always year one, right? We always have to take the long view in terms of our fiscal health, right? So July 1 comes, and then you have a 5% increase, right? So that 5% increase, like, we can't bank on having a 5% increase in special ed reimbursement, right? You can't bank on it, but you can bank on it for year two. But you've already made decisions, right, as we will go ahead and adopt a preliminary budget in early July.
I guess the only comment that I would have, and maybe it's more so, well, it's for my fellow committee members, as we think about, you know, the budget assumptions, but then often we get I'll say it's the trickle that comes along. So the trickle that we had last board meeting, it's a future expenditure with respect to girls hockey. Well, as each little piece comes in, we need to think of sort of that bottom line when we're saying yes or no as we think about those things. Because it's not like it all comes for us to make a decision about everything all together. That would be great, but I have not seen that happen. So, so just something to keep in mind. Thank you, Mr. McCray.
Thank you.
Next is future. That is what thank you. Is there a motion to move the budget assumptions to the full board for approval?
So moved.
Second. Taking too long. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you.
Jim, I'm trying to beat you all you can before you leave us.
That's all right.
Okay, next, future committee items. Is there anything that we want to add to the agenda? There's one thing I would like the four of us to do if possible, and that would be to lay out some sort of schedule for visiting schools. With the view is from a buildings and grounds view of things. We've gotten a lot of information, particularly over this year. We've seen, as we're wrapping up the 2020 referendum and the next level, so I know that Jim, Carl, and I, we've probably some years ago, with former Commissioner Hoof, we did some walk-arounds, took pictures. I know many of the pictures will be the same because we haven't addressed those things, but it would be good to just get an update to refresh in that. So I will send out some dates and things so we can coordinate to do that, so. Anything additional that we want to do as a committee? Okay. And future committee is sometime next year. I will join the retired non-paid working member group, so our date is,
January 21st would be the normal date, however, we will be in conference in Milwaukee. We are looking at potentially having a workshop on the 28th, so did you want to look at a different night or afternoon? Or prior to the workshop? Or a future decision being made on that?
yeah, I think that probably a future decision on date and time. I'm uncomfortable picking a date and time at this point, so, yep, we will poll and see what we come up with. Okay, we have reached the end of our agenda. We are
I did have a thought.
adjourned.
And,